Karen's here.
What do I
Barbara,
have to do to turn my
Esty,
camera on?
Dana, yeah, go ahead. Take your time. Ken's here. Deborah Trainer. Hey, Deborah.
How do you put the camera on?
Very carefully.
What do I
Oh,
do?
there. Yeah.
Lower left.
How about now? Let's see if it comes on now.
The
There was a
lower
line
left
through it.
corner.
Let's see if Arlene Nagate comes up.
The camera.
Okay, Dick, you want
Oh, now
to?
it's eliminated now. I got rid of it. Oh,
Dick,
It
okay.
says that my screen is disabled. What do I
Okay.
do?
Do start video on the bottom left next to the,
Got it.
Why does it say a bash?
I don't know.
Aha, it did it.
Good job. Hi, Sandy. Nice work.
Hi.
See, the millennials are leading the way. That's what I like to see. I'm telling you, all the
Yeah,
millennials who
why
work
is it
for
wrong
us.
name?
Dick, mute yourself, Dick. Dick,
Turn off the
Agate,
what?
mute yourself. Maybe I need to.
Okay, bye.
Okay. All right. So let me just see if we got people still coming in. We do. Hold on. I'm so glad to see everyone. I just want to give everyone 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll start because we have a lot to talk about today. So good to see all of you.
Hello,
Hi, Rabbi. Are we there?
everybody else.
Wrong name, but we're there.
Hi, Maxine. Hey, welcome. Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone, please turn off your cell phones so that we don't hear yourself, or at least put them on silent so that we don't all hear your cell phones. Thank you, everyone. And if you're in a noisy environment for some reason, if you have dogs or kids, or heaven forbid you have both, just go ahead and mute yourself. And then when we get to I'll be pausing periodically throughout the teaching and giving people a chance to ask questions. So then you're free to unmute yourself. You can also use the chat feature at the bottom if you want to ask a question. I'm pretty sure I won't get to everything and everyone, but we'll do the best we can. Okay. And it looks like pretty much we've got a bunch of people watching on Facebook too. So I'm guessing we probably have about 100 people on right now, which is pretty great for studying Torah in the middle of the day.
Welcome back. Welcome back. We missed you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're all pitching in, all the rabbis, and trying to share all the teaching, and I'm glad to be back. I'm going to do the next thing I'll do after this is obviously my Shabbat message will go out today. I'm going to write it right after this hour. And then the next thing I'm doing, I think, will be Shabbat morning services on June 20th. But just keep looking at your daily emails, and that will tell you everything that all of us are doing online to teach and get us through this.
I love watching you on NBC.
Thank you. Thank you. Tell NBC. Yeah, email NBC, tell them. Okay, thank you so much. All right, time to begin. So let's all go on mute. And I promise I'll stop periodically and you know, give everybody who wants to have a chance to join in. This week's Parsha, Beha'alotcha, and we'll talk in a moment about that word. Begins, for those of you who have a Chumash with you, have a Bible with you, Torah with you, Numbers chapter 8. Numbers 8, verse 1. That's where we're beginning. And those of you who've studied with me for a long time, you know that we always say a blessing before we study Torah. So if you'd like to join me, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. There we go. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who commands us to busy ourselves with Torah. So now we're going to get busy, and here we go. So I want to, it might sound silly, but I want to begin at the beginning. I want to look at the first 3 verses of this Torah portion. Beha'alotcha. which means when you raise up, when you lift up or put up. So here are the first 3 verses. I'm only going to do them in English. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to Aaron, who we know was Moses' brother and was the high priest, the chief religious officer of the Jewish people at the time, and say to him, Beha'alotcha, when you mount or put up or place up the lamps, let the 7 lamps give light to the front of the lampstand. So this is about the menorahs, the lamps, the furniture, the lights that were part of the Mishkan, this portable sanctuary that the then called Hebrews, we would call them today Jews or Israelites, the then called Hebrews used as the center of their camp as they moved through the desert for those 40 years. And so Aaron mounted the lamps at the front of the lampstand as the Lord had commanded Moses. So I want to now share with everyone one of many, many, many and important and beautiful ways that lamps, light, flame, oil, wick, that this entire concept of a lamp burning in the Mishkan, which later becomes the Ner Tamid, the eternal light that burns in the temple in Jerusalem, and then later over every ark of every synagogue in the world to this day. Want to explore now for a moment one of the metaphorical understandings of this idea of these lamps that burned in front of the tabernacle or the Mishkan. If you think about a lamp, especially back then, pre-electricity, it really it had 3 components: a vessel, something to hold the oil itself, and a wick. And the rabbis give a fair amount of thought and conversation to the interplay between the oil and the wick. And they see it metaphorically as the interplay or the symbiosis or the relationship or the codependency, and I mean that in a positive way, of God and the Jewish people. And they imagine God metaphorically as the oil, as the fuel, the source of light. But of course, without the wick, that source, that fuel, is impossible to see in the world, impossible to feel the warmth of, impossible to be guided by if it remains in its vessel and there's no wick to be the connecting point between humankind and God. Religious anthropologists often talk about something in Latin that's called an axis mundi. An axis mundi is the connecting place where the earthly and the heavenly connect, where God and humankind connect, where God and the individual connect. Some of you know I've taught you this before. If you think about the primary symbol of Judaism, it's the Star of David, the Magen David. And that's comprised of 2 triangles, one pointing up, superimposed on one pointing down. It represents the joining together of the heavenly and the earthly, the oil and the wick. A cross, as I've taught you before, is exactly the same symbol, really, or a different symbol with exactly the same meaning. This joining together of the vertical and the horizontal, this axis mundi, this connecting point. And for the rabbis, human beings are the connecting point with God, the wick in the oil that takes God's energy and light and warmth and teaching and makes it real and discernible in the world, in the world of human life and discourse. If you think about this now in a more religious sense, God is a commander, in Hebrew, a mitzaveh. God issues these commandments, but the commandments can only be fulfilled by human beings. A mitzvah can only be fulfilled by human beings, despite the fact that there's a mitzvah, that there's a commander. So in essence, from a Jewish point of view, we are actually God's agents on earth. That's what it means to be a human being from a Jewish perspective. It is to be God's agent on earth. Without us, God is banished solely to the heavens. There is no access mundi. There is no connecting point. There are two separate entities in parallel existence. In Proverbs, any of you, by the way, who have been to the large chapel at Hillside, you've seen that phrase on the wall there, which is a verse from Proverbs, which says, the soul of it. Listen, this Hillside was, I think, built in the 50s, so it's sexist. It says, the soul of man is the lamp of the Lord. I would translate it. This is a verse from Proverbs 20:27. The soul of human beings is the lamp of the Lord. In other words, God's light shines through the human soul. And all of this comes from the symbolism of these lamps that stood in front of the Mishkan. So I want to pause now and just see if anybody has a comment, a question, a thought about this idea of this, and I mean this again in a positive way, this codependency between God and human beings as evidenced in this metaphor of the oil and the wick. And you can, I can scan and see if anyone's raising their hand. And if not, it just means I did such a good job explaining. Yeah, Alex, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hi.
I believe, like, I've been, doing a lot of spiritual stuff lately the past few years. And I think of it in terms of like, it was really hard for me to like conceptualize the idea of God for a very long time. But what I learned is like at first, like you just kind of accept it into like little things in your life that maybe something popped into your head in like a situation where either you would kind of like go in a negative direction and for some reason you took whatever situation positively.
Yes.
So there's these little things that changes in thinking or looking at the positive instead of the negative, like
Yes.
like whether you like believe in God or not, there's something that is bigger than ourselves. Like like I was taken down to the ocean. Like we're not the center of the world. Like we can't stop the waves, we can't stop certain things from happening. And whether you believe that that's really God or something bigger, I believe that it's God.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like opening up your heart to something that's bigger than yourself, that there are things that you can't, there's a lot of things you can't control and stuff.
Yeah, the wick is a conduit, actually, right? The wick without the oil is a piece of string. So the wick is the conduit. And the other thing that you kind of got pointed to a little bit out, so we're going to be talking about later, is the rabbis also talk about the way a flame behaves. If you really watch a flame burning in an oil lamp, it goes up and then it goes down. It's not always burning so brightly. There's a tension, there's a struggle within the flame itself. And we're going to talk at the end of our session today, based on this Torah portion, about cognitive dissonance and how it can be positive rather than negative. That how when we're holding two oppositional thoughts within our mind, it can actually be something positive. And I'm going to talk about that in relation to the issue of George Floyd, his murder, and the tension that it's created in our society, and I suspect within each of us. So we're going to Alex, it's a good point, and we're going to head that direction. And Barney, I'm going to put you on notice now. I'm going to ask you to briefly explain cognitive dissonance, okay? Because we have a world expert on the subject on our Zoom today, okay? My psychiatrist friend Barney is going to give us like the Wikipedia version, okay, Barney? Nothing too heavy. Not yet, though.
Okay, it might be the John Wick version of it.
Okay.
Actually, do you have time for one more question?
course,
Because I
of
was
course.
thinking about the metaphor that you've begun with. And I'm very interested to think about how the vessel comes into it, because if
Right.
God is the oil and the wick is the transformation and the light burns, but so what is holding God?
The universe.
But isn't God
universe.
the universe?
Yes. So the way the mystics explain this is that the oil in the vessel, they kind of commingle because the oil ends up leaving a residue. In a sense, it coats it. So it's everywhere within it. And
Like seasoning.
well, more than seasoning, it literally physically coats the entire inside of the vessel. So even if the vessel is emptied, for example, it's a metaphor for evil, there's still a remnant, there's still a coating, there's still a reminiscence of, right? But the simple answer is the vessel is all of existence. Right? Okay, so barring any other, let me see, where are we? I just want to make sure. Okay, so I want to move on to the next point now. And just as long as you all think of yourselves as wicks for God's oil, I've done my job on part one. Okay. Now, next sort of sermon, there are 4 or 5 just fantastic sermons in this Torah portion. And let's go on to the next one. Let's jump ahead a chapter now, chapter 9, verse 1. And here we encounter something in Hebrew called Pesach Sheni, second Passover. And without reading the verses to you, which I would happily do, but let me just briefly explain it. So we were all commanded to celebrate, the ancient Israelites, the Hebrews were commanded to celebrate Passover on the evening of the 14th of the first month, right? They had to sacrifice the lamb and eat it fully and eat matzah and not eat chametz and celebrate Pesach. However, if you were a person who on that evening was in a state of ritual impurity, which I will explain in a moment what that means, it meant you could not participate in the Passover sacrifice because you were spiritually unfit to participate. Now, in the Torah, when someone is tameh or spiritually unclean, it doesn't mean they're dirty and it doesn't mean they've done something wrong or that they've committed a sin. To the contrary, there are a handful of mitzvot, of commandments, positive things that we do that create in us the status of being ritually impure, of being tameh. For example, if you perform the mitzvah of caring for a corpse, for a dead body, of bathing the body and burying the body, you are definitionally tameh. You are unclean. You have to go through a purification ritual before you can re-enter normal life. By the way, any of us who have ever seen or handled a dead body, we know it's true. It affects you deeply, and you need some kind of process. You have to go through some kind of process before you just re-enter what I would call normal life. You are out of balance. You're spiritually out of whack. So what happens in the case of it's Erev Pesach, it's Passover, you're supposed to commemorate and celebrate, but you had to handle a corpse that morning and you're impure, you're forbidden. So this Torah portion introduces something called Pesach Sheni, a second Passover, which was meant to give everyone who wasn't able to celebrate the first time an opportunity to celebrate the second time. And again, I want to stress this is because they were doing other holy work, not because they were lazy. If you were lazy, you don't get a second chance. But if you were busy with other things, good things, commanded things, you get a second chance. A second chance to recall the fight for freedom. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I always read the Torah each day and each week and each month and each year through my own eyes and through what I'm living in and through. The Talmud says we don't see the world as we are, as it is, we see the world as we are. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. So this week, when I read this Torah portion, what it motivated and activated in me was deeply connected to events in Minneapolis and the rioting and the new mood in America to take a far more serious and hopefully systemic and lasting look and repair of the racism in this country, which is undeniably present. And I thought about my own career and what I've spent my time and energy doing. When I first came to Los Angeles, I spent a huge amount of time on what was then called Black-Jewish relations. I went to a lot of Black churches. I put together a group called Crossing the Line, which was a bunch of young Jews and young Blacks who were all professionals, and we had conferences and we had meetings and we did a lot together. And then I got busy with other things and went on to other things. And even since this COVID crisis hit, I've been incredibly busy, focused on getting the temple through this very stormy financial situation and health situation, transitioning everything to online, as evidenced by what we're doing right now. I was building buildings. I just finished writing my next book. I was busy with things, good things, but I was busy with other things. And then the cause of creating a more just and less racist society appeared before me again. And then I read this Torah portion and I think to myself, I have another chance. I have a second chance to refocus on what is important. And I don't think it's accidental that it's refocusing on this holiday that was dedicated to the idea of fighting for freedom, which is what Pesach really is about. It is the universal story of freedom. And I think it's an important reminder that to all of us who are busy doing good things, that we will have a second chance. We can find a second chance to do the other important good things that we may have let go of in the pursuit of the present and the now. So I'm rededicating myself. I'm grateful. This is sort of my Pesach Sheni to re-engage. And I have re-engaged in a way that, as much as time allows, I possibly can. So that's sort of my thinking about this week. I hope it's helpful to all of us who are good people, who are busy doing good things, to remember that now we have this wake-up call and an opportunity to rededicate ourselves. There is a Pesach Sheni, a second Passover, where we can rededicate ourselves again to the cause of freedom, and not just our freedom. So let me pause now and just see if anybody wants to make a comment, ask a question. I cannot check everybody on Facebook because Zoom is the absolute ceiling of my technical capabilities. So I don't see anybody on our Zoom. So I'm going to move forward to the next point then. Okay. This also, I read with eyes of a person and a rabbi living right now in this moment in our country. So let's move forward. For those of you who have a text, we're going to go now to chapter 9:19. Okay, Numbers 9:19. And I think this is a very powerful and profound idea that we're about to examine here. And it has to do with a cloud. All right, so according to the Torah, imagine our ancestors with the Mishkan, this portable sanctuary in the center of the camp, And then 12 tribes camped around that epicenter of the community. And in front of the tabernacle, in front of the Mishkan, was a tent called the Tent of Meeting, the place where the elders in the community gathered and where the priests gathered to commune with God. And according to the Torah, sometimes a cloud would descend on the center of the camp, would descend on the Tent of Meeting and the Mishkan. And as the Torah says, when the cloud was upon the camp did not move. Everyone stayed put. When there was a cloud surrounding them, they stopped moving and they stayed put. And now I'm quoting Torah, whether it was 2 days or a month or a year, however long the cloud lingered over the tabernacle, the Israelites remained in camp and did not set out. Only when it lifted did they break camp. Whether, I'm going to repeat, whether it was 2 days or a month or a year, if there was a cloud over the tabernacle, they stayed put. I find this to be a very comforting, insightful, powerful idea. First, when it comes to grief, right? When you are grieving, and we grieve many things. We don't just grieve the loss of life. We grieve the loss of health. We grieve the loss of a marriage. We grieve the loss of an imagined future. We grieve the loss of health. There are many, many things that we grieve. And when you are beneath this cloud of grief, hunker down, stay put. Don't rush through it or around it or be in denial about it. I cannot tell all of you how many times people come to me just a few weeks after the death of a loved one, asking if they're normal, asking if they're okay because they don't feel better. As if somehow grief is a condition that, clears up. It waxes and wanes. It doesn't clear up, just like the clouds come and go. And when it comes, you have to sit with it before you can move forward. And of course, again, this idea of seeing the Torah through my eyes in this moment of racial strife, I want to share with you an email, I'm going to paraphrase it, that I had with my friend Bishop Kenneth Ulmer, who's the Bishop of Faithful Central Bible Church. Many of you saw me dialoguing with him Friday night during our service. And we've done a lot of things together over the past few weeks and over the past decade, frankly. And of course, being who I am, I called Ken, about a day after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And I had a whole plan. I said, okay, Ken, here's what I think we should do. Here's what I want to do. And I gave him all these ideas. And he said, Steve, it's too soon. It's too soon. There's too much anger. There's too much confusion. We need to wait. And he said the same thing to me about 3 or 4 days ago, when I yet again wanted to rush through this and get busy, which is my nature, solving a problem, doing something. And again, he said to me, Steve, my people aren't ready. We have to wait. And then I come to this week's Torah portion, where there's this very clear directive that when there's a cloud over the camp, you have to hunker down, observe, think, listen, and wait. And I think that's a very powerful and instructive thing right now. There's a saying that is often taught to physicians who work in the ER, and it comes from the military. And the phrase is, don't just do something, stand there. Don't just do something, stand there. Shut up and listen and observe and think deeply. and wait this out. Now I'm seeing a note from Gay, and Gay, I think you're making an excellent point, which did not occur to me in preparing for this afternoon. Gay just said this applies to the pandemic too. Stay put, whether it's a day or 2 days or a month or a year. Don't move on. Wait it out. Be patient. You know, it's pretty clear to most of us that Americans have decided, you know, to hell with being cooped up. If I get sick, I get sick. I'm going out there. The part of that equation that they leave out is if I get sick, I'm going to get other people sick. So hunker down and stay put. And when we do, and I see your note, Margie, when we do stay put, by the way, beautiful things reveal themselves to us. There are amazing things that reveal themselves when you slow down, when you stop and listen, when you don't just do something, you stand there. And this idea is deeply embedded, and I don't think it is accidental. I think it's very clear that and important that this cloud was around the center of the camp, the spiritual center of the camp. To be a spiritual person is not always to be a person of action. Sometimes it involves being a person of inaction, of allowing things to come to you rather than you chasing, chasing others. And of course, I'm reading Lisa's note. We can only be responsible for our own selves and our own behavior, right? We wish other people would, not just do something and stand there, but we don't have control over those other people. So I want to just take a moment. It is. I'm not suggesting for a moment there isn't a loss in staying put. Also, of course, there is. Also, I just want to point out this paradoxical idea that when we, in some ways, you can only move forward by staying put. And that sounds paradoxical, but it's really true. Now, let me, Deborah Davidson's adding. Yes, of course. Deborah's saying, if we get to stay home, we're lucky to have homes. That's exactly, of course. And there's no, and obviously when I say hunker down, I mean that more in a more metaphorical sense too, not just literally staying home. But okay, I want to move on to the next point. Unless, let me quickly scan and see if anybody has a hand up, has anything to add. Okay, so that's our second big idea and big sermon, I think, for the day, is that sometimes we can only move forward by staying put. Okay, let's move on. I want to now just take a minute, and Barney, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask Barney to share with us very simply the concept of cognitive dissonance, and then I want to show you all how it plays out in this week's Torah portion. So Barney, the Zoom is yours, my friend.
I was actually thinking about it very much in the same metaphor that we've just been studying here. So cognitive, mental dissonance, things are not unified. So the term itself has everything to do with the capacity to manage dissonant or different or ununified feelings, thoughts, etc., and to be able to manage it. And the reason it reminded me of the passages you were reading is that the image of the cloud is a beautiful one, both for God, but also for truth, which is unknowable. You can't see. The cloud is diffuse. You can't know. You may wonder what it covers. You may wonder even the nature of what it is. And by observing, you can't tell. And in that sense, the capacity to manage with dissonant feelings and thoughts that can't be put together is the essential stance to get at truth. Because as soon as we put everything together and we think we know something, then we're cut off from everything else that we can't see. That's the running after things. That's the moving on too quickly. It's the idea of don't just do something, stand there, that is an action. The action is to stand there. It's not inaction. And by standing there, one is managing with cognitive dissonance in the hope of remaining open enough to find one's way forward in a truthful way.
Beautiful, beautifully said. Now, let's talk about how this applies to the Torah portion and to the character of Moses, right? So we're going to jump ahead now. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 11:7 and forward for those of you who are following along. And this is the second time this happened in the book of Numbers 2, where we hear described the Israelites complaining in the desert about the good old days of slavery. They're sick and tired of the manna. Remember, manna, as described in this week's Torah portion, manna is this seed-like substance that they collected every morning, that fell every evening, and they collected every morning. And according to the Torah, they ground these seeds and then baked them into cakes that tasted, now I'm quoting Torah, like sweet, rich cream. So it sounds delicious to me. And the rabbis also imagined that manna was a kind of food that when you ate it, you could imagine any taste, and it tasted like the taste you were imagining. So it was this miracle food every day. And the Israelites collected, and on Friday, they collected a double portion, so they didn't have to work on Saturday. By the way, it's why we have 2 challahs on the table for Shabbat. And this good fortune appears every morning with the desert dew. And what do the Israelites do? You know as well as I do, they complain. They're angry. We want meat to eat. It would have been better if you had left us in Egypt to die there than to be eating this garbage out here in the desert. We want meat to eat. And this is this breaking point for Moses. This is where Moses finally says to God, and I'm going to quote now because it's so powerful. Verse 14, 11, 14, and 15. I cannot carry this people by myself. It is too much for me. If you are going to deal thus with me, if you're going to treat me this way, God, I'd rather you kill me. I'm begging you. Let me see no more of my wretchedness. So Moses is struggling here between his sense of duty and the fact that he's only one human being, he's only one man, and he can only carry and do so much. And he's stuck between his spiritual aspiration and his human limitation. That's his cognitive dissonance. And the point the rabbis make, they recognize this. They wouldn't have called it cognitive dissonance, but they recognize that Moses felt trapped, felt stuck between these two tensions, that there's a dichotomous tension in his life that he simply cannot bear and cannot seem to resolve. Now, I will be the first to raise my hand. I want those of you willing to turn on your cameras and tell the truth. If you've ever felt stuck between your best self and your worst self, if you've ever felt stuck between home and work, if you've ever felt stuck between, spouse and child or child and child, if you've ever felt stuck between Jew and non-Jew, between white and black, if you've ever felt cognitive dissonance, raise your hand. Okay, that image speaks for itself. This is the human condition. And now what does Judaism have to say about the human condition of cognitive dissonance? What do we say to Moses, who says, I cannot carry all of this by myself. It's too much for me. I'd rather be dead than to live this way, than to live with this tension. So there's, this might seem like a strange jump to you, but there's a verse in Song of Songs, beautiful verse in Song of Songs that says, I'm asleep, but my heart is awake. I am asleep, but my heart is awake. That's, okay, turn your phones off. That is cognitive dissonance. I'm asleep.
Call from unavailable.
Don, can you mute that one, please?
Yeah, it's
Call
on.
from unavailable.
Okay. All right. I was on a pretty good roll there too. That's too bad. Okay. Anyway, back to business. This verse in Song of Songs, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. There's cognitive dissonance all over the Torah. The Israelites are getting manna from heaven and they're bitching about the food. They're free in the desert and they want to go back to Egypt. Moses has a sense of mission and he'd rather be dead than fulfill the mission. In the book of Numbers, the Israelites create the golden calf. They use gold to make a golden calf. And the next week, they're using gold to make this Mishkan, this holy tabernacle. You know, I'm asleep, I built the calf, but my heart is awake. I created the tabernacle and a resting place for God. And now, how does Judaism see this cognitive dissonance? It sees it as an opportunity. It sees it as an opportunity to be at peace with the dissonance and move forward one step, nevertheless. Some of you have heard me say before that I don't believe the rabbis cared whether or not people believed in God. They only cared that you acted like you believed in God. That Judaism is a religion of deed, not creed. It is a religion of behaviors, not a religion of beliefs. So when you feel this cognitive dissonance, when you feel stuck, the Jewish answer is take one step forward, that we should strive for our spiritual goals. When circumstances get in our way, we cannot use those circumstances as a justification to abandon our spiritual goal, our spiritual mission. Now, there's cognitive dissonance in dealing with the issue of racism in our country right now. What can I do? I'm only one person. Therefore, I will do nothing. And that is not the Jewish answer. The Jewish answer is, I am stuck in this tension. I am not going to let that prevent me from taking at least one spiritual step forward. To quote my Kol Nidre sermon of this past year, a little is a lot. There is no such thing as a small step forward because it's a step forward. Just take one step forward, do one thing. Rather than waiting, as Barney suggested, until the dissonance is entirely resolved. Because if it's entirely resolved, then you're too comfortable and you'll do nothing. So it's actually an opportunity to embrace this discomfort, which I think is really important. Now let's pause if there are any comments or questions. And if not, then I'm going to move on to our final point. Joy, I see your hands up. Go ahead. I can't hear you for some reason, Joy. You're not muted, but I can't hear you. So there's no audio, Joy, so maybe you want to type it in the chat if you can, and I'll see it. We'll take another one before that. Okay? Try typing in the chat. Anyone else have their hand up? I think, yes, Susan, go ahead.
Rabbi, you know this from the Talmud that encapsulates it really well, and I'm going to fumble on the quote, but it's not your task to complete the job.
Yes.
It's your task.
It's from Pirkei Avot.
Right.
From the tractate Pirkei Avot, and it says, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, it is not incumbent upon you to finish the task of lo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimena, but neither are you free to desist from it. It's perfect. It's perfect. I'll tell you what else you just made me think of, Susan, which I don't know, like sometimes something is so obvious I don't see it. Think about that famous quote from Hillel. If
Yeah.
I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? That's dissonance, right? And then the quote ends with, and if not now, when? In other words, you can't wait for that to be resolved before acting. So just act. Now, you might be thinking, Rabbi, that's exactly the opposite of what you just said about don't just do something, stand there. To which I would say, you're right. And that's the dissonance in that idea, that sometimes it is appropriate to just stand there. And at other times, what's appropriate is to take a step forward. And that's a tension that exists in us all the time. When, making sure my door is closed here, when our daughter was a teenager, it was a constant tension within us. Like, do we respond to that insanity or do we shut up? So, this is a real tension in life. Do I weigh in? Do I stay quiet? And so now the larger dissonance we're talking about is this idea of when do we stand there and when do we not do something and stand? And when do we do something and not just stand there? Talia, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
It makes me think about the penguins and how some are on the outside to protect the ones on the inside who are, in a sense, just standing there. But, you get to take turns.
You
and
take
so
turns. Yeah.
I also feel like sometimes when I feel like I don't know what to do, there's always a way to be of service to someone that I trust knows what to do.
Yeah.
Like the so thank you.
Yeah, this really is the tension between don't just do something, stand there, and don't just stand there, do something. That's really what we're talking about here. And this is why the Israelites were stuck in the desert the way they were. Merle, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Isn't just standing there sometimes a pause in the fact that we have to think about what do we
Exactly.
think about what that step is. So we may have to stand there before
Yes,
we can make the next step.
exactly. And we don't always know whether this is the moment to act or this is the moment not to act. I struggle with this. I'm struggling with it right now. Is right now the moment for me to say a lot about what's happening in our country or to shut up? I can tell you my African-American friends are telling me to shut up. They're saying, don't talk, listen. Okay, because whatever you say is going to be ripped apart. Even if it's correct. Even if it's correct. So now is not the time. And this is a tension. Deborah Davidson, go ahead. Unmute though. Hi, Deborah.
Hi. So I'm thinking that there might be something in between, that we have this gray cloud, not just now, but we're finally only seeing it, of racism. And perhaps it's a time in our quietness to read and educate ourselves on anti-racism.
Yeah. Deborah, that's why in my Shabbat message last week, I tried as best I could to help people understand that this begins with an internal conversation, not an external conversation. An internal examination, not just watching the news. The news is about other people, but it's also about us, and we need to look inside. That's why I quoted Solzhenitsyn, who said the line between good and evil is not a line between us and them. It's a line that runs down the middle of every one of us. And he knew a thing or two about good and evil. So exactly right. But I would say that internal conversation, while it creates a dynamic tension within, also requires stillness and a kind of detachment in order to have that contemplation. Okay, let's see, Miriam, and then I want to move on to.
All right. I just wanted to say that you brought up a point that we face perhaps every day of our lives. You always do that, Rabbi. You make everything very applicable to us. There are times in a personal relationship when to not escalate cannot be confrontational, but to be quiet can almost save a relationship. We've all seen that happen.
Absolutely.
On the other hand, when we see an injustice before our eyes, how many hours, days, weeks do your Black friends tell you to be quiet? How long should we be quiet with the risk that
I don't think
we will do nothing and perhaps we will go back to where we were?
I should be clear. Let's start with the fact that saying nothing and doing nothing are not the same thing. I'm doing a lot and I'm saying a lot, but not outwardly. And that was specifically what was being referred to by my African-American clergy friends. They're saying, Steve, don't try to fill that space now. It's not, no good's going to come of it. They aren't even filling that space, some of them. So, but the answer, Miriam, as unsatisfying as this is going to be to you, is in the Torah itself. They didn't know. When they were under that cloud, they didn't know. Was it going to be 2 days? Was it going to be a month? Was it going to be a year? They didn't know. And they just had to sit with it. And that is the deeper spiritual point here. You don't know. If you knew, then frankly, it wouldn't be a cloud in a sense, because it would be understandable and it would be discernible, you know? It's that liminal state that makes the dissonance real. And it's learning to live with that uncertainty. That is the challenge, right? Okay, I'm going to move on to my last sermon within this Torah portion. I mean, there are hundreds more, but I want to keep it to an hour as best I can. There's a beautiful verse here. We've talked a little bit about Moses and everything he was dealing with. And this is the Torah portion where Moses is called a very humble man. I'm quoting Torah now. Now, Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. It is the humility of Moses which is uplifted in this Torah portion. And when Moses was feeling this tension that we talked about, the difficulty of his calling, and when he had just had enough and wanted out, it reminded me of a story. And it's an important story for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is it relates to how we began our study this afternoon with the lighting of this lamp and the idea of the wick and the oil and the codependency, which is its own kind of dissonance between God and human beings, that we need each other. So let me just share the story with you, and I hope you appreciate the beauty of how this story connects both to the humility of Moses and his being stuck and needing to take a step forward, and this whole idea of what a lamp really represents. So this is a story about a really famous Hasidic rabbi named Naphtali of Lifshitz. And according to the story, let me just read the story to you. Rabbi Naphtali of Lifshitz was once deeply depressed. And so he took a trip to Minsk, where he was walking one night and he met a lamplighter. You know, in these villages, there was a lamplighter whose job it was to go around at dusk with a long pole with a flame on the top of it and to light all the lamps. So Rabbi Naphtali is walking, he's depressed, he's walking in Minsk, and he meets the lamplighter. And the lamplighter tipped his hat and he asked the Rebbe, "Who do you work for?" And the rabbi answered, and this is the Moses connection here, "I don't know. Who do you work for?" The lamplighter said, "I work for the town who pays me to light the street lamps every night." The Rebbe said, I want you to come to Lifshitz to work for me. I will pay you twice what they pay you to light the lights of Minsk. The lamplighter asked the Rebbe, what do you want me to do for you there? And the Rebbe answered, I want you to come to me every week and ask me, who do you work for? In other words, the rabbi knew that he needed constant reminding in order to take a step forward when he felt stuck, who he worked for, that he was the wick to God's oil, energy, light, and warmth. And that was his mission, his spiritual mission. And he didn't want his cognitive dissonance to stand in the way of fulfilling that mission, of being God's partner in bringing light to the world. So I hope no matter how stuck we may feel under our current circumstances, both from COVID and from the unrest in our country, that we don't allow it to stand in the way of us taking a single step forward. And that's my hope and my prayer this Shabbos for all of us. Let me pause now. I just want to see, we've got a couple minutes. I'll be happy to take one or two questions or comments if anyone has one. Wow, I've never seen such a quiet group of Jews before in my whole life. This is unbelievable. Okay, I see two. So I want to go to Sandy and then Susan, and then we're going to wish each other Shabbat Shalom. Sandy, go ahead. You have to unmute though, Sandy.
You know, we needed you to say what you just said. We needed to have this section of the Torah this week. I try to relate in all of the sections that you read, and the best one, the most meaning to me, was the one that said, you don't make change. We plan, God laughs.
Yeah.
You don't make decisions quickly and you stop. And I thank you for that.
Welcome. Thank the rabbis. Susan?
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay, good.
I mean, but you know what, normally with the wick and the candle and all these rituals is the more boring or less illuminating. I mean,
yeah, yes, yeah. But it's a very powerful metaphor if you explore it deeply. It really is. Yeah. Now, there was a question on Facebook that I do have time to answer. It's from Chuck Rosen. And I'm going to go back and see if I can actually read it. Chuck is asking on Facebook, do I have any optimism that the bonds of friendship between Black and Jewish communities is being rejuvenated during this time of reawakening and reflection? Well, like the answer to most questions rabbis answer, my answer is yes and no. Let's start with no. The reason that my answer is no, and I'm now going to speak out in a way that I normally would not, because no good comes of it, but you asked me a real question. So I'm going to be honest. Black Lives Matter is a very important concept. It's a very powerful hashtag, and it is a very important idea. However, as an organization, Black Lives Matter has within it some very troubling issues for Jews.
Absolutely.
Particularly support for BDS, particularly accusing Israel of genocide, particularly the way in which it conflates issues. So there, my answer is no, Chuck, because I don't ever see Black Lives Matter as an organization being something that it will be easy for Jews to embrace. As a concept, no thinking person could reject it. But as an organization, I think it presents some real barriers that thus far they've refused to deal with. Now, why yes? Why am I optimistic for a yes? I'm optimistic on the yes side because I'm seeing it happening. I'm on the phone twice a week with a handful of African-American clergy, and we're talking more frequently than we normally spoke, and we're talking at a deeper level, and we're speaking more strategically. And I see more willingness to engage on both sides. You know, I remember in the early 90s, I was working really hard on Black-Jewish relations, and I was frustrated that not enough Black churches wanted to be involved. And I expressed that frustration to Chip Murray, who was then, you know, the senior guy at First AME, which was the preeminent Black church in Los Angeles. And I was at a breakfast with Chip, and I said, I'm so frustrated that these Black churches don't want to work with us. And he said, Steve, do you know what most Blacks think about Jews? And I said, no. And he said, they don't. They just don't. They have other problems. Now I'm seeing a greater sense of openness, willingness, and understanding of the importance of us working together. So in that sense, yes, I am more optimistic. So unfortunately, Chuck, my answer is yes and no. But since we're talking about cognitive dissonance today, we can't let that stop us from taking a step forward. You know, I'm not going to let the fact that Black Lives Matter as an organization has within it some very problematic platforms and points of view. I'm not going to let that stand in the way of doing good things in Los Angeles between our two communities. So that's, you know, I'm not going to be paralyzed by that. I'm going to take a step forward in spite of the dissonance, which I think is what we've been talking about all day. I want to thank all of you. There are a lot of people on the call. It's beautiful, and I'm so grateful to all of you. Let's have a little fun, okay, for 1 second. I'll count to 3, and then we can all unmute ourselves and wish each other Shabbat Shalom. Before we do that, I'm going to urge you, please watch our Shabbat service tonight, because Dr. D, the musical director for Faithful Central Bible Church, is going to be Susan Nannis's, Rabbi Nannis's guest. I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be honest and raw, because that's who she is. So Dr. D, I'm a big fan. That's at 6 o'clock tonight. You should have received the link this morning. As soon as I'm done with this call, I'm going to work on my Shabbat message, which you should have by 5 or 6 o'clock. Shabbat morning services, Havdalah. I hope you'll be a part of some of it, all of it, as much as you'd like. And I really appreciate you being with me. And it's great to see all of your faces. So I'm going to count. Let's all unmute. I'm going to count to 3. Hey, David, we even got David in the picture. I'm going to count to 3. Everybody unmute. We're going to wish each other Shabbat Shalom. Okay, everybody unmute. And here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Great to be with you.
Bye. Bye.